I'm Nick Clark. I've been reporting on the environment for Al Jazeera for nearly 10 years. I've witnessed firsthand the effects of global warming and have been deeply troubled about the potentially devastating impact for life on our planet. I hoped that somehow the world's politicians would listen to the scientists and tackle the problem head on, but they haven't. In a few days, leaders from over 190 countries will attend a climate change summit in Paris. Millions of lives could depend on whether they agree to drastically reduce carbon emissions. I've come to London to meet a leading climate scientist who says global warming is happening much faster than most people realise.
Kevin, how are you? Nice to see you.
And you too.
Had a good trip?
Yes. Very pleasant. Sat on the train, getting on with some work from Berlin.
Politicians in Paris will be negotiating with the aim of keeping any increase in temperature below a danger point of 2 degrees Celsius. Unless they do, Professor Anderson says global warming will escalate to catastrophic levels.
Now, whether it's 4, 5 or 6, there's a lot of scientific uncertainty. What we're saying is a world that is fundamentally different from the one in which we live today. A 4 degrees C temperature world is not the world where we live today. It's like landing on another planet.
So where does this figure of 2 degrees C come from?
So what's gone on is people have tried to look at what are the impacts at different temperatures of different things around the world. What are the impacts on the rainforest? What's the impact of sea level rise? And then you sort of look at those impacts collectively and say, well, what do we think we could possibly deal with? What is an acceptable level of temperature rise? So 2 degrees C we have taken as a global consensus, with quite a lot of disagreement from the poorer parts of the world, is the appropriate threshold between acceptable climate change and dangerous climate change. But let's not pretend otherwise. If you're relatively poor and living in more climatically vulnerable parts of the world, 2 degrees C is likely to be dangerous for you, and many people will die as a consequence of a 2 degrees C temperature rise.
So when we're talking about 2 degrees C, it doesn't sound much at all, does it?
Well, certainly not. If I live in cold, damp Manchester, 2 degrees C sounds quite attractive. But it's a global average, and there are big regional repercussions from that. We'll be seeing sea level rise, increases in the intensity of typhoons and possibly the frequency of those events, problems with water and drought some parts of the year.
So Kevin, if there was to be an agreement in Paris that was to keep the temperature increase below 2 degrees C, what would that entail?
We would need to make massive reductions in our energy consumption. Because by reducing our use of energy, which most of it comes from fossil fuels, we reduce our carbon dioxide emissions. At the same time, we would have to have a Marshall-style plan of converting our energy systems from high-carbon energy systems from coal, gas and oil to low-carbon energy systems. And if we put those two together, we've got an outside chance of holding 2 degrees centigrade. So we are talking about profound fundamental changes. Regular use of the airports, regular use of taxis, regular use of largest cars, living in houses that are probably quite big. Some people are having 2 homes, consuming lots and lots of consumer goods that are brought from all over the world by high carbon forms of transport. We will have to significantly change how we do all of those things.
So how do we convince people like me and other people who need to fly for their jobs to make the sort of contributions that you're talking about?
Well, we think of low-lying islands that are vulnerable to the climate, the Marshall Islands, Kiribati, or the coastal strip of Bangladesh. They're going to suffer the impacts of our activities. Do we really need that extra flight for a city break because we have such a stressful job at the cost that someone in Bangladesh will have to, at some point, see their child washed downstream because of a flood or a storm or a change in deltas?
Professor Anderson practices what he preaches. He hasn't flown in over 10 years. Recently, he even took a train all the way to China for a conference. Now I'm feeling guilty. I'm about to fly halfway around the world. I want to see for myself how the way we live our lives in the West affects people living in more vulnerable countries. This journey will tell an important story, and I hope that's justification enough for this trip's rather enormous carbon footprint. I'm heading for the small Pacific island nation of Kiribati, a collection of 33 atolls halfway between Australia and the United States. Home to around 100,000 people, It's one of several island states at risk of being submerged if sea levels continue to rise. 32 hours after leaving London, I arrive in South Tarawa, Kiribati's main island.
It is incredibly exciting to have arrived in this remote part of the world in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but it's also immediately apparent just as soon as you arrive that there is a battle going on. Look, row after row after row after row of mangroves have been planted to try and protect this causeway that leads from the airport. And also there's teams of men, as you can see, who are continually working, bolstering up the sides of the road. It's the first thing that you see as soon as you arrive, this battle against the ocean.
The island of South Tarawa has an average width of just 400 meters. On one side, a vast empty ocean. On the other, a 500 square kilometer lagoon. It is densely populated. You either live next to the sea or next to the lagoon, or both.
So this is the lagoon side, right?
Oh yeah, that's a lagoon side.
So where's the ocean side over that way?
I meet with Muri in the village of Nanakai.
Is it far?
Yeah, every close.
Very close. Can we see? Let's cross the road here. Oh look, there it is. Look how close it is. It's right there. That's incredible.
In March this year, Kiribati was hit by Cyclone Pam, causing severe damage. Sea walls were breached, villages flooded, hospitals evacuated. Many feared they'd be swept away in the surge of high waves from the ocean.
When the cyclone comes, all people in Ankai or in our village, I'll run away to some people will run away to the church to pray to God, and some houses are flooded.
This is where everybody's houses are. Hello. So all of this was submerged, was flooded.
At its highest point, South Tarawa stands at only 3 meters, so even a small sea level rise can be dangerous for the villagers. When Muri tells me that 10 years ago, the high tide mark was several meters away from the houses.
From the water, you can really see how low-lying the island is. There's practically no elevation at all. There's just this lagoon this side, a narrow strip of land where everybody lives, and then more water on the other side in the middle of millions and millions of square miles of open ocean. There's nowhere to go up. There's nowhere to go sideways. There's nowhere to go at all.
I arrive at this village, Tebi Kenikora, just after high tide.
So you see the water here has come up a lot, hasn't it?
The village chief tells me that 2 hours earlier, this was all dry land.
Oh, wow, look at that. Look at that.
Yeah, this is, of course, the people in this house left this home, their home, about 4 years ago. That's when we started to have this opening, breaking wall, because of this high tide.
And this area here was dry, was it?
It was dry. It was? There was 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 houses. They have moved away.
I mean, to me, this looks incredibly high. It's up against the houses. It's coming over the wall here.
This is nothing. During full moon, with a wind like this, it will go even higher.
There you've got sacks full of sand, I guess, and there's tires there.
Those are the sea walls. People are building it to stop this high tide problem.
Araya tells me that before the year 2000, the island had never experienced a cyclone and extreme storms were rare. Now they happen regularly.
That's your house over there, right?
Yeah, right.
You've got the best spot,
The best spot for the wind.
For the wind.
And the waves.
Hello.
Sometimes we feel uncomfortable because we can see the dead cats inside this house because of the sea.
This is right by the sea. Can we go and take a look?
Sure.
Before leaving, I go to Araya's home to say goodbye. He's lived here for 35 years and has seen the sea rise dramatically in that time.
When I was in school, they said that only about this size every 10 years. But I think it's more than that. Most of the children out there thinking that their future would be in some other places. Sad. One of my little granddaughter asked me a question the other day and said, Papa, are you going to build us a boat? A boat for what? When the whole ground is covered with water, we have a place to jump on. But what can we do? Somebody are enjoying what they're doing with gases and all that. Bigger countries, eh? But we are reaping the consequence with our children.
This place is absolutely extraordinary. Look, somebody's built a seawall around that old outhouse there. How long is that going to last? People here aren't so much living by the sea, they're almost in it.
Today, leaders of Pacific nations are attending a conference in Kiribati, a prelude to the upcoming Paris summit.
I don't think any other leader in the world, nor in the history of humankind, has ever faced this same situation we are facing in low-lying nations like Kiribati, Tuvalu, and the rest.
I find it all very shocking. These heads of state are seriously talking about their nation's very survival, even the possibility of mass migration. I want to know if the President of Kiribati believes his islands can be saved. I visit him in relax mode at home.
The water was coming over into the buildings, into our home. If we didn't put the seawall, we would have lost some buildings. And so, but we've got to keep doing this. Even if we have zero emission, we would still be underwater. In order to survive the rising seas, in order to survive the weather, the more severe storms, we have to raise our islands, but we don't have the resources to do it. And so we have to ask the international community to come in on this.
All these countries around the world sit around the table and you have this annual meeting of the UN and nothing seems to happen. Who do you think is to blame for this?
Governments are made up of politicians, and politicians worry about the next election, okay? And we just had a prime example of this during our recent conference in Papua New Guinea, where the island countries were pushing for a very ambitious, very aggressive stance on climate change. But our bigger brothers, Australia and New Zealand, said, no, it would be so disastrous to our cattle, our farming industry and our industries. It damaged their economy. I said, okay, we understand what you're saying, but what we are saying is not about our economy. We're talking about the survival of our people. I've always referred to climate change as the greatest moral challenge for humanity. Because if these people knew that this is happening to us, why do they continue to do it? I cannot understand it. How can you pretend to be a moral person if you know that what you're doing is hurting people on the other side of the world? Because I am talking about real people. People that I know, that are close to me, and I really hope, and I must believe, that we have to deliver the solutions. It would be so disastrous to be able to say, no, I used to be from that land, which is no longer there. It would be a terrible crime to our grandchildren.
My visit to Kiribati has only emphasized the stark reality that dangerous climate change is not a future problem. It is already here. Many believe it's not just poorer countries that face climate disaster if the politicians in Paris don't deliver. I'm in the United States to meet a scientist who's taking exceptional measures to try and make something happen.
You know, I'm really looking forward to meeting up with Jim Hansen. He's such a renowned figure in the world of climate science, perhaps the most renowned. And now he's suing the American government. And why is he doing that? How bad can things be? It's going to be very interesting speaking to him about it.
Hi, Nick.
Great to meet you.
Thanks for coming out here.
Appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
This is a great day, so we can sit outdoors, okay?
Jim Hansen first published evidence of global warming back in 1981 while working for NASA. He's been trying to warn policymakers that the planet is heading for climate catastrophe ever since.
They seem to think either that the scientists are exaggerating or else, you know, the effects are going to be a century or so away, and so we don't really have to worry about that.
So what do you think it is that's prevented governments doing what they should be doing to protect the planet?
Our economies depend upon the energy we get from fossil fuels. They provide more than 85% of our energy. So it's not going to be easy to make the transition to clean energies. It's much easier to just keep doing what you're doing, because there are a lot of people making a lot of money that way, and so they prefer to see us stay on that path.
What do I know that would cause me, a reticent Midwestern scientist, to get myself arrested in front of the White House protesting?
After more than 40 years as a US government scientist, Hansen has now turned to activism.
And what would you do if you knew what I know?
And when I was asked, well, why do this? One of the reasons was by that time I was a grandfather with several grandchildren, and I decided I didn't want them to say, Opa understood what was happening, but he didn't make it clear. So I try to make it clear.
In July this year, Hansen, along with 16 other scientists, published their latest and most troubling findings about the impact of more rapid ice melts at the poles.
What the data suggest is that we could, within 50 to 60 years, get sea level rise of several meters. And our coastal cities will be doomed. More than half of the large cities in the world are on coastlines.
And what of the tens of millions, the hundreds of millions of people who live in them?
Yeah, well, you know, the refugee crisis now is small potatoes compared to what will happen if we let sea level go up several meters. And yet we're not, you know, understanding the seriousness of the threat and how imminent it is.
So in August this year, Hansen tried a different and more drastic tactic to force the politicians to take action.
One thing that I'm doing with my oldest grandchild, Sophie, is filing a lawsuit against President Obama and the American government because they are not taking the steps that are needed to keep warming less than 2 degrees.
So why do you think it was necessary to sue the government?
It looks to us like the most likely way to get quick action from the government, because our elections for both Congress and the executive branch are very strongly influenced by campaign finance, and that means the biggest industry on the planet, fossil fuel industry. So if the court then tells the government, well, you've got to have a plan that actually preserves a planet for the next generation, then we might start to get more action.
So if Paris only offers up limited, to say the least, limited progress, what does that actually mean for my children, for your grandchildren?
If all that Paris amounts to is what it appears to, where it appears to be headed, with no real global reductions in emissions, then our children and grandchildren will inherit a situation that is out of their control.
Given the urgency Jim Hansen has expressed, why can't the politicians move forward and take action? There's clearly no time for delay. There's someone else I want to meet who's also recently turned to activism, the former chief negotiator for the Philippines government. Yeb Sano is leading a pilgrimage from Rome to the climate summit in Paris, along with his brother. I caught up with him in Switzerland. So this is day 34. I wanted to know what made him give up his job.
My motivation for this is quite simple. I have children, and I want to be able to look into their eyes and tell them I've done my best to leave you a better future, a world that cares, a world that is safe. Over the years, my frustration has piled up.
This process under the UNFCCC has been called many, many names. It has been called a farce. It has been called an annual carbon-intensive gathering of useless frequent flyers.
The Warsaw Conference started days just after Super Typhoon Haiyan, the strongest storm that has ever made landfall, hit the Philippines. And it was truly a difficult moment.
The devastation is staggering. I struggle to find words even for the images that we see on the news coverage. And I struggle to find words to describe how I feel about the losses. Up to this hour, I agonize, waiting for word to the fate of my very own relatives.
When the storm surge struck, Yeb's brother AG was visiting Tacloban, one of the cities hardest hit by Typhoon Haiyan.
Immediately, as I went out of the hotel, the water level was still high, so I went into the water. I already saw some dead bodies. For 1 month straight, I would have I had nightmares every single night.
More than 6,000 people died in the Philippines as a result of Super Typhoon Haiyan.
Who would take the blame? No one would take the blame. But scientists all over the world know who exactly to blame. Can't stop thinking of my good buddy, my mentor, who died in that super typhoon, along with his wife, his little boy, who we love so much. The process in the UN, I've long given up on that. Then we must need to bring the power back to the people. Because how many world leaders do we have? Maybe less than 200. But there are billions of people that can be converted into this fight.
Paris is not the deadline for the people. It may be a deadline for the process, but the people and this journey will continue.
And there they go. You know, it's amazing what Yeb and his brother AG are doing, and the whole story is just so moving. After everything they've been through, now they're stretching themselves, pushing themselves to their physical limits just to make the world sit up and take notice. It's remarkable.
The Paris Climate Summit begins in just a week's time. So far, the combined national commitments to reduce emissions will not keep our planet under the dangerous 2 degrees threshold. It's worrying and it's frightening. Speaking as a father, what kind of legacy are we leaving our children? What kind of future are they heading into?